It happened on December 11th, so it was 42 years ago. Yes, 42 years ago.
December 11th, 1969, 12:25 p.m. A Korean air flight left the city of Gangneung with 51 passengers. Within 10 minutes of takeoff, the plane was hijacked by a North Korean spy. The plane, originally bound from Gimpo, changed course near Daegwallyeong and landed at Sondok Airfield near Wonsan in South Hamgyong Province. The news came like a thunderclap and threw the entire nation of South Korea into shock. As time passed, concerns about the abductees grew louder.
When the plane landed, they woke me up. Then, outside, we saw 20 to 30 North Korean soldiers with M1 carbines surrounding the airplane. There was no confusion, though. I remember the flight attendant telling us that we were probably in North Korea. There were some elderly people in the plane, and I saw them bursting into tears. They also took away our ID cards and began to cut them in half. I heard that on the New Year's Day of 1970, when there were no guards, my father started singing the song Gagopa. The lyrics were something like this: I want to go back. I want to go back to the South Ocean where my home is. Some of the other abductees were singing with him, and then North Korean soldiers came in and dragged my father outside. Someone who escaped from North Korea told me that after that day, the other abductees could not see my father. I was also told that the 11 victims who had not returned to South Korea were the ones who strongly rejected the North Korean regime and said they had to return home.
The South Korean government sought the help of the International Committee of the Red Cross in negotiating return of the abductees. For their part, South Korean citizens responded with a nationwide rally condemning North Korea. The international society also joined, criticizing North Korea and calling for the return of the abductees. Finally, 66 days after the hijacking incident, the North Korean government returned 39 passengers through Panmunjom.
It is difficult for me even to try to remember that day. I was told that the people who were kidnapped were supposed to return. There was no phone in my house, so I went to some kind of intelligence agency in Gangneung with other families. They were announcing the names of returnees one by one, and I thought my husband would be one of them. The names were read one by one, but he was not there.
However, 11 passengers have yet to return. 42 years have passed since the hijacking.
I should have looked at my husband's face when he was going out the gate on the day of the flight. I was pregnant, so I was lying down, and all I said to him was, "Come home soon." If I knew he would be kidnapped, I would have seen him go. But I didn't see his face.
As longing grew in the victims' families who were left behind, their pain also seemed to grow stronger.
After my father was kidnapped, my mother was mentally shocked. She suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid personality disorder, and she really had a hard time mentally because she couldn't find any explanation for what had happened. And my father was kidnapped out of the blue. She always thought that anything could happen to us, even if it wasn't kidnapping. So when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to do things that other kids did, like riding a bike or talking to strangers or swimming, because my mother thought they were too dangerous. Even when I was in school, my mother would sometimes feel anxious, so she came to school and took me back home. Well, the moon must rise every day in North Korea too. I thought that my father would see the same moon and imagined that he would be looking at the moon just as I was. That's how I comforted myself.
When my children were young, they would ask why they didn't have a father, and I told them he just went somewhere, and he will come back soon if they do well in school. But as they grew older, they learned that their father was kidnapped and began to struggle with that fact. So at one point, my family broke apart. My children and I were sick, so we went to the hospital very often, and at that time I told them he will be back, after 1 year, after 2 years. But now that 42 years have gone by, all I really want from the government is simply to let us know whether he is alive or not. Isn't that what the government is supposed to do? Families of the victims gathered in Seoul once, and we talked about what to do with this problem many times. But our government doesn't care. The media doesn't cover the story for whatever reason. And they even said that only minors were kidnapped. And for adults, they didn't consider it as kidnapping. What's the use of running around looking for help when the government doesn't care?
In 2001, the third reunion for the inter-Korean separated families took place. Mrs. Hoo-dok Lee was reunited with her daughter, Kyung Hee-sung, who was a flight attendant in the Korean air flight. It was their first meeting in 32 years. The 23-year-old sassy girl was now in her 50s. Mrs. Song also brought news about other abductees.
During their reunion, Miss Song let us know that the captain and the co-pilot were living well in North Korea, and another abductee, Kyung Suk-chung, was also living well in the same neighborhood. And Miss Song's children called her aunt. She didn't know where the other 7 abductees were, but she heard they were all alive and well. So I thought that I had to meet my father, and that's when I decided to join the campaign to have the abductees returned.
In 2006, Mr. Hwan requested the North Korean government to confirm the fate of his father, Mr. Hwan Hwan, through the Korean Red Cross. The answer he received? Unable to confirm.
My father was kidnapped in North Korea. So whether he is still alive or not, he would be somewhere in North Korea. Telling me that they can't confirm whether he is alive? It can't be true. And I can't accept it.
When his father, who was a producer at a broadcasting company, was kidnapped, Mr. Hwan was only 2 years old, but he decided to devote his life to confirming the fate of his father, whose face he can't even remember. November 4th, 2011, Gyeonggi Province. In November, a campaign was held to urge the return of the abductees during the 1969 Korean air hijacking incident. Mr. Hwan, who serves as a representative of the Victims' Families Committee, has traveled around the country and organized similar campaigns twice a week since September, with the hope that he can see his father. Because of that hope, Mr. Hwan is leading the efforts to raise awareness about the hijacking incident, which has faded from people's memory. The campaigners ask for only one thing: other people's concern for the issue, so that they can confirm their family's fate and be reunited.
I knew about the hijacking incident, but I forgot about it after all this time. If the government doesn't take care of this problem and get the abductees returned, who will? The hijacking incident is a human rights issue. And everyone in the world should be told about it. I think that things like the hijacking incident should never happen again.
Does the North Korean government have any intention to return the remaining abductees?
It's the NGOs that have really been behind this issue. all we want is a period of time for the families to be reunited in a third country besides China. What do laws and regulations matter for families who are reunited for the first time in 40 years? When we meet, we will just spend day and night telling stories to each other and do what we want to do.
In August 2011, the United Nations Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances officially requested the North Korean government to confirm the fate of 3 victims of the 1969 Korean air hijacking incident. According to the UN regulations, North Korea must provide an explanation for the fate and whereabouts of the abductees by next February.
We hope that other people will also share our wish to be reunited with our families, and that they will cooperate with us so that we can meet our families as soon as possible. We think that if the abductee issue is solved and the victims are returned, it may be the first step to resolve the tragedy of other victims. And we believe that the international community will be the key to resolving the abduction issue and removing the pains of all victims.
I have to survive. And I survive because of the hope that my husband is alive somewhere. He is alive somewhere.
For 42 years, 11 abductees have not returned to their loving families. And for 42 years, their families have waited for the return of their loved ones. The hardest part for those families is facing people's silence and stark indifference.